The first truck came up the gravel lane a little before 8 on a gray morning in the last week of October in the fall of 2017, and it never slowed at the house. It backed to the edge of the back field, and the bed went up, and the load came off in one long rolling crash. Black nursery containers tumbling end over end, root balls splitting open, 10-foot trunks folding under the weight of what came down behind them, burlap and wire baskets, and a snarl of branches and pot rims skidding out across the dead fescue. The driver never got down from the cab. Before 9 there was a second truck, and behind it a third, and by noon 3 heaps of dead-looking trees stood higher than the fence line on a 34-acre farm the county had already given up on. They looked like a wreck. That is the honest word for it. Maples and oaks and lindens and 100 things nobody could have named at a glance, some of them 10 and 12 feet tall, every one of them still standing in the pot it had been grown in, pots 3 sizes too small, pots they had been sitting in for years past the day they should have gone out the gate. Tags faded to blanks, half-turned leaves still hanging on in October, roots coming out the drain holes and wrapping the outside of the root balls like rope. Halstead Growers had waste to be rid of. 600 acres of container nursery over on the far side of the county line, one of the big wholesale outfits in the nursery country of the Highland Rim, and every fall it runs the same arithmetic every grower runs. A tree that outgrows its container class stops being a tree. It becomes a handling cost. Nobody buys a 3-inch trunk out of a 15-gallon pot, and nobody hauls one either. And the yard it stands on is worth more empty. Grinding costs money by the ton. Landfilling costs more. An old handshake said the back field on the Ostrander place would take it for free, an arrangement made years ago with a man who had since died. Cars slowed on the highway to look at the heaps, the way cars do, and every one of them arrived at the same thought, which was the only thought the pile seemed to allow. 400 trees, and not one of them worth the diesel it would take to move it. Why would anybody want that? If stories like this keep landing in front of you, the channel is worth sticking around for. Go ahead and subscribe and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Now, back to the story. There is a woman in this story, and the first thing she did was the last thing anyone expected. She did not call a lawyer, she did not call the county, and she did not call Halstead, though a lawyer would tell her later that she had a clean case and should have called all 3. She walked out to the pile that afternoon in a canvas jacket, with a spiral notebook in one pocket and her father's cloth tape measure in the other, and she started counting. Her name was Marnie Ostrander. She was 47 that fall, and by every measure the county had, she was finished. She had spent 19 years as a hospice nurse, driving the 2 lanes of 3 counties with a bag on the passenger seat, and that spring the hospice had been folded into a regional operation headquartered 90 miles east, and her position went with it. Her father had died the March before and left her the 34 acres, and the acres were in the same condition as everything else he left. A barn with a bowed ridgeline, a well that ran cloudy, 2 mortgages, and a field of fescue and cedar sprouts where a nursery had been. That was the part nobody in town remembered anymore. The Ostrander place had grown trees once. Back when her father was young, every second family on that road grew trees, digging bare rootstock by hand and shipping it out of the county in the dormant weeks, because the Highland Rim happens to sit on ground and in a climate that will grow very nearly anything anybody wants to plant. Then the business got big and got mechanized and moved to the flat land and the plastic pots, and the small growers sold out or aged out, and her father let the fields go to grass and took a job driving a school bus. He never spoke about it. There is a particular silence around a family that used to do a thing well. So when the trucks came, the county's red on it was gentle and total. The Halstead outfit had found the one place in the county with nobody left to object. They were dumping trash on a written-off farm belonging to a written-off woman, and she would take it, because what else was she going to do? But 19 years in hospice had taught her the one thing that turns out to matter in this story. She knew the difference between dying and finished. They are not the same condition. They do not look the same and they do not behave the same, and the mistake almost everybody makes, the mistake that costs the most and gets made the most, is calling the first one by the name of the second and walking away early. She got her father's tape out of the shop, and for 11 days, in the cold, she measured every trunk in the pile. Not the height, not the pot. The trunk, 6 inches up from the root flare, 6 inches up from the ground. That is where a tree tells you what it is worth. Because a landscape tree is not priced by beauty, and it is not priced by height. It is priced by caliper, the diameter of the trunk measured 6 inches above the ground, and it is priced by the inch, and the price per inch climbs as the inches climb. Because every inch is 4 years of somebody's watering and staking and pruning, and there is no way known to the trade to hurry it. A 1-inch whip is a commodity. A 3-inch shade tree is a weight. Landscapers wanted 3-inch shade trees, and the wholesale yards had an 18-month line for them, and the price of a single one would embarrass you. She counted 412 trees. She tallied 986 caliper inches. Then she sat in the truck with the notebook flat on the wheel and ran the multiplication twice, because the first answer was absurd and the second answer was the same. Halstead had not dumped 400 trees on her. Halstead had paid a hauling contractor to dump 986 inches of finished, unhurriable time on the one field in the county that had nothing but time on it. Emmett Rusk lived 4 miles up the road and had grown wholesale nursery stock for 38 years before the big yards and the box stores ate his margins and he sold the last of his ground. He was 71. He came out on the 3rd day, not because she asked, but because he had driven past twice, and he stood in the wind with his hands in his jacket and looked at the pile the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. "Half of them are dead," he said. She said, "Which half?" He looked at her for a second longer than the question needed. Then he waded in and kicked a container over and hauled the tree out by the trunk and held the root ball up. And the root ball kept the exact shape of the pot with the pot gone, a solid tangled cylinder wound around and around itself. "Girdling," he said. "It will strangle itself in 5 years and you will never know why." He pulled another. The same. "And this one," he said, running his thumb down the trunk to the soil line, "is buried 4 inches deep in its own pot. They pot them deep, and then they pot them deeper. The flare is under there somewhere. That is not a tree. That is a fence post that has not worked it out yet." He told her maybe 200 were savable if she worked all winter and did every step right and got a wet spring. He told her the other 200 were a burn pile. He told her she would ruin the first 100 learning. Then he took the tape out of her hand, dropped to one knee, and measured a trunk himself 6 inches up and looked at the number for a while. "You'll do," he said. The winter of 2017 and 18 she worked in a coat. She bare-rooted them, washing the soil off 200 root balls with a garden hose, 40 minutes a tree, until the root system lay bare in front of her like wiring pulled out of a wall, and she could finally see what the pot had been hiding. Then she cut. You shave the circling roots off the outside of the ball. You cut the ones crossing the trunk. You take a root that has grown a full circle around its own stem, and you sever it, on purpose, knowing the tree needs it. because the tree needs it less than it needs the next 10 years. Emmett said it was the hardest thing there was to teach anybody. Everybody wants to save every root. Saving every root is how you kill it slowly. She planted 140 into a growing-on block that April and rows on the good south-facing ground her father had let go to grass, and she planted them at the depth they had been sitting in their pots. That was the first failure, and it was total, and it took 1.5 years to surface. Because the flare had been buried in the container, and she matched the container, so she buried it again, and by the 2nd August, 60-odd of them were thin in the crown and shedding early, and then shedding earlier, and dying from the trunk down in a way that looked like drought and was not drought. Emmett dug one out with her. The bark under the soil line had gone to a wet cork, and a new root had come around the stem and taken it like a wire. "You planted the pot," he said, "not the tree." The second failure came the next winter, and it came out of hurry. She heeled the remaining bare rootstock into a trench because she had no room and no money, and the winter of 2018 and 19 came in dry and open, no snow cover, no insulation, wind out of the west for 6 weeks. The trench heaved. The roots froze and thawed and desiccated in the cold, dry air, and by March she had lost most of another block and had a burn pile that took 2 days to work through. That was the winter she nearly called Halstead and told them to come and take the rest of it back. What saved her was the trash inside the trash. Through both of those years, she had been quietly ignoring about 60 trees at the back of the pile. The ugly ones. The old ones. Hand-lettered tags gone illegible. Cultivars with names like a great aunt's. Things nobody had ordered since before she was born. They had no crown left worth selling to anyone. So she cut them off at the ground, meaning to be done with them, and left the stumps standing in a row and forgot about them. In May, they came back. Not one shoot apiece, 6, 8, 10 straight shoots each, coming up off the root collar with the force of a root system that had been feeding a 12-foot tree the week before and now had nothing left to feed but a stub. Emmett came down and stood over the row and started laughing, and it was the only time she ever heard him do it. "That is not a dead tree," he said. "That is a stool bed." And then he explained the thing that turned the whole pile over. Every good-looking tree in that dump, every fashionable new cultivar, everything with a little circled R and a patent number stamped on its tag, was patented. 20 years. And inside those 20 years, you may own that tree, you may plant it, you may sell it, and you may not make another one. Not a cutting. Not a graft. Not legally. So the beautiful trees, the valuable ones, the 986 inches, she could sell those exactly once, and then they were gone and she was back to a field of grass. The ugly ones at the back were the ones whose patents had run out 30 and 40 years ago. Free, unowned, anybody's. And they were not merely old. They were the understock. The open secret of a modern nursery is that the patented top everybody pays for is grafted onto an old, plain, unowned root, and the yards had nearly all quit growing their own rootstock, because rootstock is slow money and there was always somebody else to buy it from. Then, over about a decade, the somebody else's quit too. So the pile stopped being 412 trees she could sell one time. 60 stumps in a row at the back of a written-off field were a mother block, and a mother block is not something you sell. A mother block makes trees. Every year. For longer than she would be alive to cut them. 2019 was mounding. You cut the stool bed to the ground in the dormant season, and you mound the new shoots with soil and pine bark as they come, halfway up twice, 3 times across the summer, burying the base of every shoot so it strikes its own roots in the dark under the mound. In the fall, you pull the mound away with your hands and cut the rooted shoots off at the base. And every one of them is a liner, a rooted, saleable young tree. And the stool throws the same crop again the next year and grows it back bigger. She took 210 liners that first fall off 60 stumps she had cut down out of spite. The salvage caliper trees went first, and they went fast, because a landscaper who has waited 18 months for 3-inch shade trees will drive a long way down a gravel road and take everything standing on the place. She sold them dug and burlapped, and she sold them honest. She told every buyer exactly where they had come from and exactly what she had cut off the roots, and Emmett told her that was foolish, and it was the smartest thing she did. Because the one thing nobody in that trade can buy at any price is a grower who tells you what is wrong with the tree. The liners went second, and they went somewhere better. In the spring of 2020, a truck came up the gravel lane, and it was a Halstead truck, and the man who climbed out of it was their buyer, and he had driven down to look at rootstock. He did not recognize the field. He was 3 sentences in before he understood that the outfit he worked for had paid a hauling contractor to deliver, for free, onto this exact patch of fescue, the only block of unpatented understock left inside 100 miles, and that the woman standing in front of him with a tape measure hanging out of her jacket pocket owned all of it. She sold them liners. She has sold them liners every year since, and by that fall the arrangement had turned the whole way over. Halstead began paying her to take their culls, not tipped blind off the back of a truck anymore, but sorted by cultivar, tags on, stacked, and called ahead. The trucks still come up the lane. They stop at the house now. By 2021, there were rows on 20 of the 34 acres, a second stool bed of 40 more, 2 people on the payroll through the digging season, and a hand-painted sign at the end of the lane. She kept the notebook from that first October in the door of the truck. 986 inches, in pencil, in the cold, in her own handwriting. She has never once shown that number to a buyer, and she has never gotten rid of the notebook. Most opportunity does not arrive looking like opportunity. It arrives looking like a mess somebody else paid good money to be rid of, tipped in the one place where nobody important was watching, and the whole county drives past it at 40 miles an hour and agrees, without ever stopping, that there is nothing there. The pile does not argue. It sits there, being what it is, waiting on the one person willing to spend an afternoon longer with it than everybody else was willing to spend. Marnie Ostrander never outfought anyone. She never sued, she never raised her voice, and she never told the town it was wrong. She walked out with a tape measure and asked the pile a question the whole county had been too certain to ask. Somewhere near you right now, there is something written off, lying in a heap, being called finished by people who never measured it. Dying and finished are not the same thing. Somebody has to go out there and find out which.